Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the podcast. Yes, today here's your host, Rob Elliott. And again, we've gone around the world to get the best speakers and the best guests for our podcast. And I'm here today with Tom Kereszti from San Diego in America. He's what we call a servant leader, and we're going to go deep into what that is. I know a lot of you haven't heard that term before, but I'm pretty sure you'll understand. He's an awesome guy. Welcome to the podcast, Tom. How are you?
I'm great. I'm living the dream in Southern California, and you're also living the dream in one of the best places to live in the world, Australia. So great to connect with you,
mate. Thank you very much. I've been to California. You do have a good place there. It's fantastic. Have you always lived there in the beautiful state, or did you come from somewhere else?
No, I was born in Budapest, Hungary.
Yep.
Under communist rule, and we came out. I was about 12 years old when we immigrated to New York and the tri-state area there, and then lived in the New York area till I was about 30 years old. And then 30 years old, I became an expat, international executive, and then I spent the next 25 years outside of the U.S., living all over the world and working all over the world. And then in 2005, came back to the U.S., settled down in the California region.
If you go back to when you first immigrated, like a 12-year-old, that would have been an amazing experience to go from basically polar opposite countries. What was it like when you left your home, basically, where you'd grown up, and immigrated to the States, which was very, very different to where you come from?
Well, it was scary, intimidating as a 12-year-old kid, obviously. But I've been kind of an extrovert, go-get-em type of individual all my life. So I always embrace change. Even now I'm 65, I'm still embracing change. I think change is always good. You can try to fight it, or you can accept it and benefit from it. So
true.
I favorite, one of my favorite stories coming to the US, because I was an extroverted kid. I lived in the neighborhood. I looked out the window and I saw these bunch of kids playing, and I didn't speak a word of English at the time. So I kind of went out there and tried to play with the guys, and came home, and I was exuberant. I said, I learned a new English word. And they said, what is it? I said, shit. So, a bunch of kids are playing with me at 12 years old. So, they taught me that new word, and that's why I probably came home. And probably about 6 months, I was, speaking fluent English. So when you're that young, you kind of pick it up easy.
And how did you find the difference in schools? It would have been pretty tough not having a lot of English and going to school.
Well, one of the things that helped me is by the time I came to the US, which was I was 12, in what we call grammar school, K through 8th, I was already speaking. My native language is Hungarian, second language German, and third language Russian. Right?
Wow.
So in Europe, they teach your languages at an early age, which makes sense, because it's a proven fact that cognitively speaking, when kids are very young, they pick up languages, and that's the time to teach them. And unfortunately, in the U.S. educational system, they don't start teaching a second language until you're in high school, and it's too late. Yeah. So you really should teach them. So language was really not an issue. And frankly, I thought the educational system in Europe that I went through as a kid, the stuff that I was learning in, 6th, 7th grade in the US, I was, already probably in 3rd or 4th grade in Europe. So it was I think there was a little bit more advanced than it is in the US.
So when you finished sorry, we've had a bit of a lag here, you go.
Yeah.
No, when you finished high school, what did you do? Did you go straight and do study, or did you just go in and get an boring old corporate job?
No, corporations wouldn't hire you out of high school here. So you got to go to university. I was an undergrad in engineering. And then later on, when I was working, I got my MBA. So you do 4 years of college, get a degree, and depending on how you hit the economy, you may have some great job offers, or you may be working at McDonald's. Just depends on the economy.
That's true.
I hit it right when I hit it. And it really was 1 year difference. When I graduated, by February or March, I had 3 job offers, and I wasn't graduating until June. So the economy was great. A year later, I remember the company I worked for, they rescinded 2 or 3 different offers because the economy took a turn for the worst. So
What type of engineering did you study?
I had a mechanical engineering degree. At that time, it was I had a computer science minor. Just to give you an idea, when I graduated, how old I am, right? The way computer science worked back there is you had these things called card key punchers. You would like sit at this machine that would punch little holes in these index cards, and then you hand a whole bunch of index cards to a guy who would go into this gigantic room, and then about a half hour later, you get your results to say, was your program working or wasn't working? And that large room, probably, a phone would replace twice that room now, right? Because there's just technology is just accelerated so much now. So
yeah, well, technology just used to improve every 10 years. I think they said it's now every like 10 months. It's leaping forward. You've worked, I'm just looking down here, you've worked for Colgate Palmolive, Philips Electrical, and Reckitt's, just to name a couple. How did you break into big companies like that? Because that would have been a closed door, and they're some of the top companies in the world. How did you find knocking down those doors and saying, "Hi, here's me. I want to work for you"?
well, the first one, Colgate, was, they had a very active recruiting program out of college. So those are the guys that gave me right out of school. And like I said, I had 3 interviews. And one of the reasons I went to Colgate was, back then there was no internet, there was no websites to look at. So
True.
I would during a visit, I would always pull people aside and say, "Hey, what do you think about working here? How does it feel like?" And I remember going to Grumman Aerospace, and the guy said, "This place sucks. Don't work here," right? And then Colgate, everybody I spoke to was like, "This is a great place to work." We're having a lot of fun. I remember my college interview. This guy Dave Benz interviewed me, and Dave and I became good friends after I took the job. But they've kind of opened up and said, "Okay, Tom, all right, forget about talking about your grades, because you were either smart enough to cheat your way through college, or you were smart enough to actually get the grades. So put that aside. You got your diploma. Fine.
Awesome.
Tell me about you. Tell me about you. Who are you? What, and I think that's the key to good hiring, is understanding who the individual is, what about him, and what makes him tick. And then I think you see if it's a good fit for your culture, for your vision, and all that stuff in your organization.
So if you look at those first, I mean, by the looks of it, was it those companies you got to travel the world with?
Colgate was the first one that gave me an opportunity. And, I always say, when opportunity knocks, you have to be ready.
You do, yeah.
If you kind of start saying, "Okay, here's an opportunity, let me get ready for it," then it's too late.
Yes.
And for me, my story was pretty simple. I was blessed to be working for a gentleman, Frank, and he was the first servant leader that I met before I even knew what servant leadership was. But Frank and I put a plan together, and they said, "Okay, Tom, your plan for the next year is we want you to present and get on projects, so you get exposure to at least 3 of the executives, vice presidents of Colgate." Right? There was executive vice presidents of core competencies like marketing, like sales, like finance, and there was also 4 vice presidents who ran the regions of Latin America, Europe, Far East, stuff like that. So I got to present to 3 of the executive VPs of that who ran the regions, right?
Yeah.
And so I got to be known as somebody corporate headquarters, if people knew my first name. And then Eastern Europe happened, and lo and behold, from 22,000 people, 4 spoke Hungarian. Right? So if I was born in Poland, I probably don't talk to you right now, because a lot of people spoke Polish. But very, Hungary is a very unique country, very unique language, and there was 4 of us, and I had just been through that phase of getting on projects team, of getting noticed, of getting exposure, of meeting the executive VP. So I simply reached out to Ed Fields, who was running the emerging markets at the time, and said, "Hey, I saw what's happening with Hungary, the Iron Curtain. I think there's a great opportunity there. I would love to be involved." And lo and behold, they said, "Okay, we'll send Tom to Hungary to start it off." So that's how that kind of evolved because I took the initiative, and B, I was being prepared and groomed to actually get exposure to the senior executives high up in the organization, so they knew who I was. And that's kind of put it together. opportunity happened, and I was already and prepared to take advantage of that opportunity. So then I went overseas. That was my first expat assignment. And then over time, I became known as what I would say a turnaround and startup specialist in emerging markets. I had a couple of feathers in my cap where I started companies, whether it was in Mexico or Hungary, and then I turned a bunch of companies around in Eastern Europe and in Latin America. And then, people just kind of said, okay, well, here's that guy, Tom, who is getting a name for himself. He's creating, quote unquote, a brand for himself. I always viewed myself as a brand and treated myself as a brand and advertised myself as a brand, I would say.
Yeah.
And I became known as a turnaround specialist and startup specialist in emerging markets. And so all of a sudden companies wanted to hire me for that skill set.
Awesome. So before we get in, we'll discuss about the turnarounding companies, because a lot of them have had to do that, especially in the last 2 years. You said before you used the term servant leadership. For our listeners, what is servant leadership and how does it apply today?
Well, look, servant leadership is, it's a biblical principle. It goes to thousands of years back, and it applies today just as it did, 2,000, 3,000 years ago. And I was not always a servant leader. When I was young, I thought it was all about me. Right? I said, okay, well, what do we have to do to get Tom's projects approved? What do we have to do to get, Tom promoted? I mean, it was really a self-centered type of approach. And then as I became wiser and, frankly, the world humbled me a couple of times.
Yeah.
I realized, look, it's really not about me. It's about something much bigger than me. And through servant leaderships, I've grown to understand that as a leader, my number one responsibility is to make other people successful, because if they are successful, then by default, I am successful. So the focus shifted from me to a cause much bigger than me, get people to buy into that cause, which is much bigger than me, and then really have them understand how they can contribute to achieving that goal. And they're really providing resources for them so they can be successful, whether that may be resources in budgets, whether they be resources in training, other support, but to give them, a chance to succeed as an individual, as a team. So it wasn't about me, it was about everybody else. It was about a cause that was, much bigger than me. And I call it, creating an environment for success. So as a leader, my job and every leader's job is really create an environment of success for your organization.
How do you handle it when you come across, and I do know someone like this who is a manager who manages a quite a large team, but he's a micromanager. So rather than empowering the people around him to do the job, he likes to take it and do it. And it can work again. It does work against him.
Oh, absolutely. I think John Maxwell said it best. He's one of my mentors. He says, managers are very good at doing things right.
Correct.
And leaders are very good at doing the right things. Right.
True.
And that's really the difference between a manager and a leader. A manager basically says, look, there's a process, whatever that process is. So he's in charge of managing a process to make sure that it works according to it was designed. A leader basically looks at the process, say, I don't think that process is the right thing. I think we need a different process. I think we need something different. We need to do the right things instead of doing things right. Now, never mind the manager. I mean, a micromanager, I don't think they're even a manager. A micromanager is more like a supervisor, because one of the things I talk about in my book is really putting the right diverse team together. And if you're right, if you hire the right people and intelligent people, you better get out of their way. You kind of get them to buy into the overall vision. You get them to buy into the culture. You get them to buy into understanding what their specific task is to make that vision a reality. But get out of their way. I mean, you hired intelligent people, and if you try to micromanage intelligent people, I guarantee you that if you don't fire them, they'll leave within 6 months, because they're not going to stand for that. If you want to hire stupid people and micromanage them, well, that's not the model I would follow.
And I've also had feedback from people who work for him that he doesn't create a sense of team. He likes to keep the team divided rather than together. And these days, that's a real recipe for disaster. Have you ever come across someone like that?
Well, they say there's 3 levels of leadership, right? The first level of leadership is leading yourself.
Yep.
The second level of leadership is begin to lead followers. And then the third level of leadership is developing future leaders. I was talking to a young lady, and she says, "Tom, I know exactly what you're talking about. I was in a situation where she worked for a pool, swimming pool company, and she said, our department was great. Our department manager was a fantastic person.
Mm.
We're really firing on all cylinders, getting everything done, making our targets, and then all of a sudden she left the company. Now, when she left the company, somebody else came in. That didn't work. Then somebody else came in. That didn't work. So, I know exactly, Tom, what you're talking about great leaders. And I responded to her. I said, look, I don't think she was as good a leader as you thought she was.
Yeah.
Right. Because she was a level 2. Right. She had great followers. But if she was a level 3, she would have been able to develop the next generation of leaders that when she does leave. And look, I could get hit by a car tomorrow. I could catch COVID and die. I mean,
Yeah.
You have to have plan B, and every leader's responsibility is to develop future leaders in the organization. So when they are taken out of the situation for whatever reason, right, there's the next fan up, and they think they can take that leadership role. So, but a lot of people are insecure of that. Like a lot of people are insecure of developing future leaders because they believe that's a threat, threat to their job security.
That's true. Yeah.
And I say exactly the opposite. Look, you're going to be extinct, whether you like it or you don't like it. You don't have control of your job security because of any number of variables that you don't have control over. So why not get intelligent people? Why not get motivated people and make sure that they're ready to step in your role? And that was always a philosophy that I used. I was never threatened. I mean, one of the guys that signed the back of my book, he was a brand manager in one of the organizations that I worked for. And, he eventually rose to run I think a 1.5 or $1.2 billion organization. Right. Because, some of the stuff that I helped him with, some of the stuff, obviously, he was a smart guy. So, he grew and became a mature leader. Right. But that was always my philosophy, never to hold people back, but in fact, get them ready and mentor them and train them so they're ready for the next step. And that's what secure leaders who are secure themselves. Insecure leaders will micromanage, or I should say insecure managers, because they never lead to leadership. They're managers.
Yeah, true.
And they're afraid. They're afraid of their own job security. They're not sure of themselves. So that's why they keep other people down.
You spoke before about having things that are out of your control, and a lot of people like that like to control. The last couple of years with COVID has really thrown many businesses, it's out of their control. They don't know what's happening. And many of them have found themselves in a position where they have to turn themselves around. If someone came to you and said, look, Tom, we've got this business, we're struggling now because industry's changed, how we deal with people has changed, how we do business, I need to turn my business around. What would your approach be to something like that, to a small, medium business, to say, okay, this is what we need to do to get you into whatever the new norm is going to be?
Well, look, life is a series of pivots.
Yeah.
Right? If you kind of, cement, your feet in stone and you can't move anywhere, that doesn't do you any good. So
true.
For example, right? I mean, 5 years ago, I would be appearing on a stage as a keynote speaker at a company event or some other event, talking to 400 people. All right. Yeah. So now today I'm on your show. You're halfway across the world.
Yeah.
And I don't know how big your audience is, but I'm sure it's bigger than 500 people.
Yeah.
And I get my message out. So, through adversity comes opportunity.
Yeah.
And the world had a very big diversity. It was called COVID, and it changed everybody's life.
Yes.
But through that came opportunity. I mean, you and I are on Zoom. Zoom became a very successful company because of COVID.
It did, yeah.
Right. And there's a lot of other companies who became very successful because of COVID. And look, let's face it, our generation, and I had a lot of negative things to say about the younger generation, because I believe when two people communicate and two people connect, we use all our senses, right? We use our sense of smell, our sense of touch, our visual sense, and you reduce that to really voice and video on a Zoom call. So you lose a lot of the other senses of how people connect. But the fact is that the younger generation has grown up with that type of communication. I remember I was in Chicago a couple of months ago visiting my daughter, and my wife and my two daughters are sitting at the table, and this group of young kids come and sit next door to us, and they sit down at the table. There's a double date. There's two guys and two girls, and they don't say a word to each other. They just take out their phones. They're checking in. They're and they're not. There's like zero verbal communication going on. But as much as I dislike it, and as much as I say that's a negative, but you have to recognize that that's how a lot of the communication takes place today. It's through Instagram postings and TikTok and all this stuff, and that allows, in the age of COVID, for people to accelerate that communication. That staying home and being locked down and not seeing people. So now there's an alternative to communicating, which is the TikToks, the Instagrams, the Zooms, and all that stuff. And you can still build as a company, take a look at that and say, all right, well, in this new world and this new world of technology, how do I pivot to, rather than complain about it, pivot to use it to my advantage? So through adversity comes opportunity.
Have you seen 2-3 years ago how we managed or lead people is very different to today as well. It was easy to follow a process. It was easy to train someone because you knew how your customers were going to interact with you. And you've just said how now, well, they interact very differently. Some still like the phone call, some like face-to-face, some just like a text or an Instagram post. Have you seen anything when you've been managing and turning around and trying to help people, help C-suite managers, them a bigger challenge than what they had 3 years ago? Or is it just that openness to change?
Well, look, I think people follow leaders, and I don't think that has changed over time.
Yeah,
I think the process has changed of communication. The process has changed on how to run things, right? Software as a service is a big part of our universe today. It wasn't there 20 years ago, 25 years ago, but I think people buy into leaders regardless of I think that's a time-proven process, and I say there's every individual should be able to answer these 3 questions, and these 3 questions have nothing to do with technology. Right? And I'll answer those 3 questions for myself. So the first question is, who are you?
Yep.
Do you have a self-identity? Do you know what your values are? Do you know what your character is? And by the way, does your character actually line up with your reputation, right? Which is also equally important, right? And you have to have a clear answer of who you are. And you introduced me in the beginning of your show as a servant leader. Well, that's who I am. I'm a servant leader. Yep. That's who I am. That's who I've been for the last 20 and 30 years. And that helps identify and help me be very, very sure-footed of who I am. And then the second question is, what are you passionate about?
Yeah.
Right? And I have a clear answer to that. I'm passionate about making things better. I'm passionate about adding value to people, adding value to products, adding value to companies, to customers. So I'm all about looking at somebody and say, hey, I can help you become a better version of yourself. I can look at a product and say, the product that we're going to introduce is actually going to help a customer base, humanity, whatever. So, I'm just not launching a product for the sake of launching a product, right? Customers, I want customers to be happy with our services and products, and I want my customers to make money and margin, right? So it's all about, service. It's all about adding value. And then the third thing is, what are you good at? And I believe I'm pretty good at mentoring and leading.
Yeah.
I've been doing it all my life. So look, for somebody to buy into a leader, they have to look at their leader and say, I believe that, Tom is a good leader, and I believe I want to be on his team.
Yep.
Because I buy into him. I understand what he's about. He's a servant leader. He's not a selfish guy. He's a servant leader. So I will get on this team. And by the way, Tom is really passionate about what he's doing, because if Tom is not passionate about doing, why in hell would I want to follow him? He's not passionate about it. How am I going to be passionate about it?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to, be on somebody's team who's incompetent. So, whatever you're doing, be good at. I don't know what you're good at, but I'm sure that you're good at something. So just be good at it and be in what they call the strength zone. I share a story all the time about my great uncle, and it's a little gory story. Maybe your audience doesn't appreciate it, but in Eastern Europe, pig slaughters are pretty common.
Yeah.
Right? And during the winter months, they slaughter a pig. It's a farm animal. It's
Yep.
easy to raise. And they do it in the winter because there's no refrigeration in Eastern Europe. So as a kid growing up in Hungary, I used to go to my uncle's farm, and I had zero respect for this guy because this guy cursed, he mumbled. I never understood what he said to me because he was always mumbling and cursing. And then when I got to be a little bit older, then he made me do shots of the local moonshines. And, he smoked probably about 2 packs of non-filter cigarettes. So I thought this guy was a bumbling idiot,
Yeah.
but he was my uncle, and I had fun on the farm. And then, when I got my promotion and Colgate sent me back down to Hungary, to open that front. And, I was, general manager there. So I'm the executive, and, the family reaches out to me and said, Tom, you got to come down to the farm. We want to, slaughter a pig in your honor. So I was like, all right, the prodigal son is coming home. This slaughtering the big fat calf. So, I go out there with my wife and my daughters, and, we're having a pig slaughter, and they wheel out this animal. I guess it was about 300 kilos. So what's about 500 some odd pounds. So it's a pretty big, large animal.
That's big.
And my uncle, with one knife, within 2.5 to 3 hours, basically has got this thing dissected, the salami stuff, the sausages and stuff, the bacon's hanging in the smokehouse with a knife, right? So, here's the thing where, I looked at my uncle, who was a bumbling idiot in my eyes, and all of a sudden he rose, about 200, scales, because he was in his strength zone, and he was doing what he was passionate about.
Yeah.
He was doing what he was good at. And all of a sudden the light went onto my head. It was like, this guy's actually pretty cool, that he's really good at something. So we're all good at something. I don't know what it is. My uncle happened to be good at, taking pigs apart and processing them. And when he was doing that, the respect in my eyes, grew 100-fold. So just figure out what you're good at, and be passionate about it. And sooner or later, you'll be a leader.
So your book, CSuite Beyond, what inspired you to write that, and what's it about?
What inspired me to write it is actually happened by accident. As a public speaker, one of the things that you do is you build personal stories, because when you're on stage, you share personal stories that helps you, number one, remember what you're talking about, because you can't forget your personal stories. And number two, it helps you connect with the audience, because people like stories, especially they can identify if you share stories of failure rather than stories of success.
Had a few of them myself.
Yeah. So I started writing all these, stories down for, stage. And I looked at the stories. I said, what the heck? I got a lot of stories here. I could probably write a book. And then I said, okay, well, if I write the book, how do I structure it? John Maxwell wrote many, many books, is one of my mentors. And he says, look, when you write a book, make sure that you understand what's going to make that individual turn the page and keep reading.
Yeah, true.
So I said, okay, who would be interested in all my personal stories? And I put a framework around it. And I noticed that with all these stories, some of the stories were when I was successful, and some of the stories were when I wasn't successful. So I said, well, what was common when I was successful, and what was missing when I was not successful? And I boiled it down to the 4 keys of leadership success. I said, okay, well, these 4 keys were always present when I was doing well, and some of the keys were missing when I wasn't doing well. So that became the framework for the book. I called it CSuite and Beyond, because I'm way beyond C-suite. At one time I spent a lot of time in corporate C-suite. Now I'm past that. And I said, look, I wish somebody had given me a book like this when I was 21.
Yeah.
Like kind of a little bit roadmap of, and it doesn't mean I got it right, but it says, I think I got some things right. So I'd love to share with somebody, young executives, up and coming executives, even more people who just got into C-suite, to say, okay, these things worked for me. They may or may not work for you. There are some principles, and they just not worked for me. But I looked around before I went out with the book and said, okay, let me look at some other leaders. Let me look at some other successful companies, and do they share these same 4 principles? And they do.
Yeah.
So that gave me the encouragement, the inspiration to write the book. And it's really about how to be successful as a leader. And I call it the 4 keys of leadership success.
Yeah. Oh, mate, it's awesome. I think there's a lot of high-end books around, a lot of high-end courses, but there's not a lot in leadership, especially for people to pick up and just learn, who are just starting on their journey. So, kudos to you for doing something like that. If
Thank
you were
you.
walking down the street now and you came across your 20-year-old self and he looked up and went, Tom, what would you say to me? What, 3 or 4 pieces of advice would you give me to start my journey? And you look back at where you've been and what you've done. And it can be a 20-year-old kid. It doesn't matter who you're thinking you're talking to. What would you say to them now when someone's about to leave their university or college and start their life?
Well, what I would say is, and this is not the first time somebody asked me this question, so I had a chance to think about it a little bit. But basically, look, understand who you are and what your strengths are, right? And don't ever lose that. Don't sell out. Don't become somebody else. Be true to yourself. Be who you are. Figure out what your strengths are. And again, if somebody said, Tom, answer those 3 questions: who you are, what you're passionate about, what you're good at. That would have helped me a lot when I was 20. The other thing that would have really helped me is, if somebody said to me, Tom, what's the vision for your life? When I was 20, unfortunately, nobody asked me that, but even if somebody would ask me that, I said, what does that question mean? What's the vision for my life? I asked that to somebody and they said, well, the vision for my life is to own a house in 5 years. Well, I said, that's a nice plan. That's not a vision, right? A vision for my life. And my vision is man of God, leader of men. Right. I was always a leader of men or leader of people. I wasn't always a man of God. That came in, about 1994.
Yep.
But what a vision helps every individual do is to help you make major decisions in life. Right. So anytime, let's say I'm offered a job, which I was, by the way, in Eastern Europe, a lot of cigarette and liquor companies wanted me to work for them. And I said, look, that really doesn't fit my vision, man of God. I can't really feel good about making people consume alcohol and smoke cigarettes. So I think I'm going to pass on that. Right?
Yeah.
Or, it may have been a job that I didn't feel was a good leadership role for me. Right. So every time you make a major decision in life, you run it against that vision statement. And that holds true by the way, for great companies as well. Unfortunately, Simon Sinek says, what is your why? And your why really is your vision statement. And in one of the presentations he talked about Kodak and how Kodak lost their way. They lost their vision. They were an imaging company. If you just kind of stuck to your vision, say, I'm the best imaging company in the world, the whole technology with phones and everything else, digital technology, Kodak will still be at the front. And they kind of reduced themselves to a paper manufacturer after a while, right? So because they lost their vision, their American Can became an insurance company. I don't know how that happened, but they're so people, if you're true to your vision, which is a very, very long term, and I think there's great examples. One of the things that is true for a good vision statement, it's very simple for people to understand. Right? So when people look at me, they say, okay, Tom is a man of God, is leader of men. They can understand that. They can buy into that. They can also say, Tom, you're not really being a leader of men right now. You're not really being a man of God right now. So what's going on with your vision statement, right? So they can even hold you accountable for that.
Yeah.
Great companies have great vision statements. Some people call it mission statements. Some people call it vision statements. I'm not going to get bogged down in semantics, but Nike, great company, right? Their statement is we unleash human potential, right? So that's their why. They want to unleash. So everything that they do helps, people become, better versions of themselves. Coca-Cola, we refresh the world, right? I'm not sure, if Coca-Cola stops making refreshing products, then they start losing their way.
They do.
Right.
One of the most common questions I get asked, and it came to me while you were talking then, was when you and I grew up, we were used to direct feedback. It was just given. The boss said something and you nodded and went, yes, sir, and off you went and did it. Millennials and younger people entering the workforce don't normally react that well to direct feedback. You dealing with a lot of senior managers and middle managers, what piece of advice would you give them when they're coming across the younger generation who don't react that well to how you and I were given feedback, which doesn't make it right or wrong, but they do struggle with that communication level and they do battle with when someone says you've done it wrong, go and do it this way?
Well, I think you have to build relationships with people. If you don't have a relationship with somebody, they're actually, they will naturally have a tendency to react negatively to feedback. If you develop relationships with people, in fact, I think one of the problems with corporations are they have this quote unquote performance review that happens once a year. So it's like this magical event that happens once a year, and two people sit across the desk, and everybody's ready to battle and get the boxing gloves out and say, yeah, I know I'm preparing myself because I know you're going to tell me all the things I'm doing wrong and why I'm not getting a raise this year. So it's just a very stressful situation. And I think if you build relationships with individuals and not have a once a year event for feedback, it's a continuous ongoing, it becomes part of that relationship. But when I worked for Colgate, the first, I think, 2 or 3 performance reviews with 2 or 3 different bosses were like that. And it was, it was stressful.
Yes, I remember as a young one, it was stressful for me as well.
So when I worked for Frank, and again, this is the guy that I was speaking very highly of early in my career. And he said, Tom, we'll do your performance review. We got a conference, you and I going out to Chicago. So we'll just do all we're out there. I said, all right, no problem. So, I've got my notes prepared. This is, the first review I have with Frank, and, I'm waiting for it. And Frank says, hey, before I go out to dinner, let's meet in the hotel lobby. We'll sit at the bar and we'll do your performance review. So we're like, all right, well, so we go down and, we're sitting at the bar and I'm doing my performance review. So I'm still ready, that I'm going to get my notes out over the beer and we're going to go, I got the boxing gloves on, and Frank simply turns to me and says, Tom, how do you think you did?
Yeah.
So like now I'm doing my own performance review. And because of the relationship that Frank and I had, Frank, for example, one time said, if I'm going to describe Tom, it's like failure is not an option. Failure for Tom is not an option. He's going to do everything to make something, happen. And Frank knew that I was very hard on myself. So total role reversal, right? I'm saying, well, I could have done this better. I could have done this better. And Frank is saying, well, Tom, actually, don't be so hard on yourself. You actually did here, So total role reversal, rather than me defending myself and Frank beating me up, I'm beating myself up and Frank is actually defending me. So it was, but because it happened because it was in a casual setting, and it happened because Frank and I had a very good relationship. Right? With other bosses, that didn't happen because they didn't really have a good relationship with me, or we didn't have a strong bond, and it became that quote unquote critique, right? So, and it's a human tendency to go on the defensive when somebody gives you critique. But if you're willing to build that relationship, and I don't care, look, I'm 65. I can build a relationship with a 25 or a 30-year-old. Maybe I don't have a lot of things in common, but I'm going to still treat them with respect. I'm going to still treat them with dignity. I'm going to give them continuous feedback where I feel they can improve. And look, if somebody is so entitled that they cannot take constructive feedback, and again, it's not criticism, it's constructive feedback. But if they can't take constructive feedback at 25 or 27, man, they don't belong on your team. Find somebody else.
Yeah, that's true, man. It's been absolutely awesome listening to you today. You've got some real gold nuggets, as we say in Australia, for people. If someone wants to get in contact with you, buy your book and find out a little bit more about Tom, where do they go?
The book is easy. You go on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I don't know. There's many online retailers. You just look for CSuite Beyond, or just look for my last name. My last name is a curse and a blessing. It's a curse because nobody can pronounce it. Right?
That's true. I'm the same.
Kereszti. So if you kind of just Google my last name, you'll find my tutors and my sister. My sister is OBGYN in Boston, so you can't mistake her for me. And then my tutors are Alex and Nicole. So and then you find me. So you'll find my book. You'll find my website. You'll find my LinkedIn profile. So there's plenty of ways to track me down. I'm not in the business of hiding. I'm in the business of being easily found. And I have an open door policy. If whichever way you can find me through LinkedIn or website, just drop me a note and say, look, this is This is what I need help with. This is what, I'd like to get your idea on something. We'll jump on a Zoom call, complimentary, 15, 20 minutes, see if I can help, see if you like me. And if there's a match, then we'll take it to the next step.
Mate, that's awesome. And for anyone who is listening, I will put in the show notes the link through to your website to make it a bit easier for everyone, and they can go from there. It's been fantastic talking to someone like you. Some of the stuff you've said has been absolute gold, as I said before. I'm sure everyone's going to get a hoot listening to you, learn a lot. And as we say at the end of all of our podcasts, have a groovy day.
All right, groovy it is.